Lacan's Seminar XIV on the Logic of Phantasy is hard enough to read. The English translation by Cormac Gallagher notoriously falls short of the French transcript, making it difficult to see just how much Lacan depended on visualization, diagrams, and mathematical and geometric thinking. This review is dedicated to the idea of close reading, of not moving past a page before doing all that can be done to come to terms with what's presented. My personal project is based on an error. I mistook the term heuristic for heuristic. Heuristic comes from the sophist technique of refutation for the sake of refutation, without any commitment to a truth idea. Etymologically, heuristic is based on the goddess Eris, who notoriously created strife just for the hell of it. It is hard to think of Lacan making use of this device. I would rather he used heuristic as a kind of Ersatz experiment. I decided to use heuristic instead of heuristic, since the principal idea of the Ersatz conjecture is to use error data to generate a new level of critique, using mistakes to restructure problems. I had not realized that this mistake would be a real mistake that I made, confusing the two words. The mistranslation was undoubtedly a mistake, but it allowed Ersatz to convert to ansatz, that is, the lucky break that comes when, by restructuring a problem, new elements come to light. So I thank my friend Claudio Sgarbi for pointing out this error and convincing me that I was wrong. Right away you can see, in comparing the typographical differences between the two texts, one attitude, Gallagher's, which diminishes the role of the numerical number one and replaces it with what we might say is a more theological one, O-N-E. Just as his decision to use a little o instead of the little a for the auger petit a has a sense of a little zero, a little hole in something, which is clever in some circumstances, but troublesome in others. When I see the number one in the French text and read the word one in the English text, I realize that Lacan is betting on the numeric one, but Gallagher is not taking up the challenge. Like the girl in Patrice Leconte's film Girl on the Bridge, who wins at roulette as long as she follows her master's advice to always bet on the same number, we should always bet on one to get us on a lucky streak. You might think my luck had run out when I mistook the French word heuristique and the English word heuristic for the word for substituting a gimmick or shorthand idea, heuristic. This was more than a long-shot risk. It was an error. But in the logic of the Ersatz conjecture, more comes from error than from success. My luck, my ansatz, came from the accidental discovery of William J. Urban's work on amalgamating Lacan's sexuation formulas with his schema for the four discourses. This presentation plays out the connections I made between Urban's analogies and my own connections made between the functions of the no and topologies of continence and incontinence, topologies that figure prominently in architectural situations. If you know your ersatz heuristic is going to generate error data, that's what you're looking for. Then it's not just a whatever attitude. It's a creation of a multiplicity, the error data set, out of which something will emerge as a kind of unconscious, a surplus or a lack. This is the ex falso principle, that from an initial act of error-making, everything becomes possible, even the impossible, which is the essence of the auger petit a. This will become possible. And the name of making something impossible, the unconscious, which is impossible in the daylight of the symbolic, will become possible. That is to say, that it will be able to speak of itself, When something is itself the voice of itself, it doesn't have to say the truth. It is already the truth. It is the truth of truth. Urban's masterstroke comes with his association of the four positions of Lacan's sexuation formula with who is saying no and how they are saying it. In the university discourse, where all must obey the phallic law, this is the requirement of assent. All who obey the phallic law are saying yes. And the place where this rule is most clearly enforced is the university. Hegel's master-servant parable tells us the story of one who says no. This is the exception to the phallic law that ensures that those who do obey will embody their yes in a master who is the only one allowed to say no. The hysteric is a double negation. No one can say no, meaning that the hysteric makes you an offer you can't refuse, because both options appear to be foreclosed by discrediting the other, which Lacan symbolized by the big letter A, the autre. There are many more levels of meaning within the discourse mathemes, but the variations on the theme of no allow us to take some shortcuts. This is critical in the formula for analysis, the not all, who say yes, but not all of a yes, to the phallic rule, which is backed up by the hysterical demand, the offer that can't be refused, especially if you elect to be a woman. Urban goes on to give topology equivalents to these different no conditions. Generally, the no of negation corresponds to projective geometry's rules of non-orientation and self-intersection. The sphere, which self-intersects but is not non-oriented, is the all say yes of non-contradiction. You can travel around the Earth and arrive back at your starting point facing in the same direction. Not so with the torus, Mobius band, and crosscut, where non-orientation comes in the forms of the co-presence of continents and incontinence. In the torus, this is the obvious contrast between the center of the donut shape, which is not continent, and the tube part, which is. The Mobius band doesn't contain anything, but it is the face of the cut that can be made by rotating a knife as it cuts the torus in half. It is the shape of the division, a left and right version, so to speak. The cross cap is a combo form, with its lower half shaped like a bowl and upper half that sports a cut across which the inside slides to the outside. The continence relations of the four discourses and sexuation formulas move from the totally contained spatial condition that we can recognize in the modern university campus, an institution dedicated to conatus, in that every new generation of students is held to a common set of regulations and requirements, to the idea of cathetus in the Tower of Babel, whose stepped foundation leads to a dimensionless vanishing point. The idea of cathetus is Babel's aspiration to connect earth with heaven in a continuous line of one-to-one relationships. With the hysteric, there is no continence. It's all surface, a pure cut, but a pure cut of the torus, which is a way of stating the principle of transience, more popular as the idea that the more things change, the more they remain the same. Finally, the unconsolidated continence and incontinence of the torus is consolidated by the cross-cap. This is the intermediary space of the cut of transience, where instead of a pure cut as a double face, we embody the space between so that we can fill it. The first time we encounter this officially in Western history is in the pomerium of the city boundary that Romulus plowed, then filled with the blood of his twin brother. This space had to be left unbuilt and renewed with annual rituals. It is the space of Remus, the not all say yes character of history, who was sacrificed in the first civic proto-ritual. So we have 4 no conditions, 4 topologies, 4 architectures, all this on top of 4 discourses. It's a lot to take in, but Urban has made the first step. It's up to us, in our Ersatz adventures, to see what works and what doesn't. The test of the Ersatz conjecture must begin with the enigma of the cut. What is it? Since we're talking about discourse theory, we should begin with language's primary cut, made not just between vowels and consonants, but at the level of meaning between metaphor and metonymy, which compare to the condensation and displacement logic of the dream. We can put this in terms of predication, borrowing from the logic notation invented by George Spencer Brown, a kind of parenthesis that can indicate subordination. We say, of the y outside the cut, that it is predicated, or rather defined by x. This is also a condition of continence and incontinence. Y can be many things: big, orange, late for an appointment, as round as a beach ball, but it is still Y. The attributes can belong to other things, but beneath the container that covers them, they belong to Y. Y is incontinent. X is contained beneath the bar, which is the mark of its continence. This model shows that the division between metaphor and metonymy is present in every sentence, as the torus relationship between the metaphoric noun part and the metonymic verb part. Signifiers as such can play either rule, as metaphor or metonymy, container or contained. This is a kind of chirality, a left-hand and right-hand function that makes every case of negation into a matter of rotation, as a metaphor, a condensation function, becomes a displacement function, a metonymy. The rotation is like a middle term that can turn from its left-hand aspect to a right-hand version. This turning is important when we come to the important logical concept of identity. In classical identity, the idea that A is identical to itself allows any combination of an element with a no version of itself to cancel out. But many thinkers have pointed out that the identity principle is self-contradictory. Hegel was the most famous to do this. For A to be identical to itself, it has to split. We have to have it on the left and the right of the equal sign. But this shows us 2 versions of A, one as predicator, one as predicate. A is self-intersecting, but because the positions are opposite, also non-oriented. Non-orientation produces a margin that is ambiguously either a surplus or a lack, too much or too little. We have something left over, but not enough to allow us to fold back the halves. This surplus, lack, or lacking surplus doesn't create a problem as long as we stick to local situations where the self-intersection of A with itself goes unquestioned. We simply ignore the problem of the surplus lack. But what if we are forced to acknowledge it? What if the spatial or temporal separation of these elements suddenly disappears and we see them come together? As with any 2 enemies who come close together, Y and X are uncertain which is to be the noun part, which the verb part, which is to predicate and which is to be predicated. In short, we see the rotational aspect of A's self-intersection, the non-orientation of it, come into view so that we can't ignore it any longer. This inverts the system itself, at the point where, instead of us speaking the language begins to speak us. Each time we settle on a solution, the solution itself reverts to its opposite. The most famous case of this is the Cretan liar paradox, where the Cretan says that all Cretans are liars. If he is telling the truth, then his statement is false, but that means he's a liar. So all Cretans are not liars. Or is it that non-all Cretans are liars? Or that any one Cretan is not totally a liar? So you see how the conditions of the no generate their topologies, but also their architectures. Just by saying no to the identity of A within itself, we have acknowledged the principle of language by which metaphor generates metonymy, and metonymy requires metaphor. Both embed the rotational function where there is a lack that is also a surplus, the principle of non-orientation. The gapped circle with the little a, Lacan's Auge petit a, summarizes this. As if this were not hard enough to think about, Urban's correlation schema has a benefit he has not, to my knowledge, discovered. This is the way his quadrants have duplicated the standard polygon of the torus that Lacan uses throughout Seminar XIV to thematize the move from repetition at the upper right corner to two alternatives, one inside the symbolic at the position of the torus of the master's discourse, the other at the upper left corner of the Mobius strip. This latter position is labeled the passage à l'acte, the psychotic's exile from the interior of the symbolic, as suggested by the incontinence of the hysteric, where no one says no. Actually, psychotics are always presenting us with deals we can't refuse, thanks to their acquired ability to imitate language without the benefit of the paternal signifier. Inside the symbolic, on the lower right, continence and incontinence have not yet been consolidated. The torus has a hole that is not contained and one that is. The possibility of having a flat tire means that the Tower of Babel can have its top unfinished, destroyed, or hidden by clouds. The one who says no is at the top, and we all know who this religious figure is, thanks to our failed attempt to establish a direct line of communication, a cathetus. As for the finish line of this diagram, sublation on the lower left, the torus graduates to a crosscap by consolidating its one says no principle to a not all say yes, the feminine position, where a space is made out of the cut or twist of the Mobius band. Here we have the pomerium, which according to the laws of ancient Rome was the only real space of the city. Inside the walls and outside the walls were just territories of this authentic, or rather authenticated gap, maintained by ritual that made a trench and filled it with sacrificial blood. On top of the crosscap is the principle of non-intersection. Below is the trench that fills with blood, continence and incontinence combined. With the tessera, the condition of the feminine as not all is made into its own not all space, the in-between, where not all say yes, meaning that not all of any one subject says yes. This is a yes that means no. My only conclusion is to ask you to use these options provided by William J. Urban to come up with your own insights, your own Ersatz conjectures. Although the goddess Eris is just a troublemaker, the Ersatz heuristic bets on the number one to get lucky, to turn Ersatz into ansatz. I hope my mistake will be your big win.